Deya got released today, and predictably, the community has been disappointed with her initial performance. But honestly, talking about Deya is so February 2023, it's finally time to talk about Baizhu instead, a character we got news for today. I won't go in detail regarding his kit in this video, since MiHoYo might just nuke my channel otherwise, but I will still try to provide my view on how he looks like and what his potential use cases are regardless. Let's get straight into it. As many people probably expected, Baizhu is a defensive unit. He's the second Dendro unit to cover this role, as Yao Yao kind of filled that niche already back in 3.3. His kit, however, is a bit more varied than hers, even just on the defensive side, as he mixes heals and shielding capabilities to offer a rather complete package in that sense. In fact, both his skill and burst will provide healing, and on top of that, his burst will also provide a shield that will refresh on very small intervals. As a way to balance this continuous defensive effect, his shield durability will be quite low, as it won't reach 1000 HP even if you build your Baizhu with mostly HP artifacts and substats. From a design standpoint, the reason is that primarily he's a healer, since his healing capabilities have nothing to envy to most healers in the game. With an HP based build and prototype Ember as a weapon, he'll be able to heal the on-field character by around 40,000 HP per rotation, and the whole team by around 10,000 HP. This small shield will generally only last a single hit against strong opponents, so it's comparable to Crystallize in that sense, and it's generally only useful for the additional interruption resistance it will provide you with as a result. This shield will be reapplied around 6 times throughout the entirety of his burst duration. The healing is not the only reason for you to build Baizhu with HP, as one of his passives will also increase Dendro reaction damage by an amount that scales up the more HP you have on him, for the on-field characters that receives his heals. Since I don't want to mention the exact numbers here, I'll just tell you how good this is later, when I'll analyze him from a team standpoint. Sadly, offensively, Baizhu doesn't have much going for him other than this passive. His elemental burst generates coordinated attacks whenever his shield gets broken, or if it gets reapplied while it's already active, so around 6 times per rotation, but the scaling on this ability is quite low, and its overall damage per rotation is not impressive even assuming every hit will proc a spread reaction and you're building Baizhu with crit artifacts instead of full HP, which seems a bit counterintuitive considering he has so much going for him on the HP side of things. His elemental skill is not impressive either in that sense, and overall you can expect a measly 100,000 damage per rotation from him at most on Dendro spread teams, so his theoretical highest damage comp. As I said earlier, this means that the passive I previously talked about is the only interesting part of his kit from an offensive standpoint, but how good is it really? It's easy to overrate something called reaction damage bonus at face value, but it's really not as good as it sounds if you know how the reaction damage formula works. In short, it's not like a traditional damage buff, so not a multiplier that buffs the entire damage, but relatively a much smaller factor instead. Assuming you're using Baizhu on all Haitham Teams, and is buffing the latter's spread damage for his entire rotation with a full HP build, the damage increase will result in a very insignificant 6% for all Haitham specifically. To put this in perspective, it's comparable to Yao Yao's Constellation 1 buff, which increases Dendro damage by 15% for active characters that receive her heals. Honestly, offensively he's just really comparable to Yao Yao as a whole, so a unit that's not worth building damage for over focusing on healing utility instead, especially with stages that contain enemies such as consecrated beasts in mind. Since his buff increases both Bloom and Quicken related damage, it performs best on teams where there are on-field procs of both, so a quick Bloom composition with an Electron fielder, and there is no better unit for this role than Cyno. From my early calculations, Baiju's passive increases Cyno's damage output by 9% on Quick Bloom teams, which is not shabby, but also not comparable to Nahita's Elemental Mastery buff for him there, for example, which increases his damage by 18%, making Baizhu a poor replacement for her from an offensive standpoint. That's not a big issue, however, as Baizhu is probably meant to be used in tandem with another Dendro unit on the team due to his problematic 80 energy burst cost. On Cyno Quick Bloom teams specifically, this might not be very practical, as it would mean removing the second Electro unit on the team and forcing Cyno to run the Thundering Fury set for extra energy over the much more useful Quick Bloom set, namely Gilded Dreams. Whether or not this is a net gain for the team, that's something I'll explore in the following days, but the potential is there. On the other hand, finding a place for Baizhu on Cyno Aggravate teams is much easier, since you can run a double Dendro, double Electro team with no issues, but as I mentioned before, Baizhu isn't really impressive offensively on this type of team compared to other options, so we won't really outshine other defensive units such as Zhongli or Yao Yao in this role from a damage contribution standpoint. The additional value for Cyno specifically comes from Baiju's off-field Dendro application, which will be continuously activated throughout a 14 seconds time span, assumedly making Cyno better than before in multi-wave content. For Nilou Bloom teams, Baiju's healing is a nice addition, as the team can always use more of that due to its suicidal Bloom tactics. As you might have predicted, his passive isn't great offensively here either, since it's a minimal buff to begin with, and since it only applies for the on-fielder, which means it will only buff a part of the Bloom reaction damage dealt by the team. On Nilou teams, it's pretty much impossible to control who gets the most procs, which makes maximizing Baiju's buffs tricky. He should be a nice addition regardless, as him being a healer and having on-field Dendro application by being a catalyst makes him unnatural for this team by default. In terms of builds, as I said earlier, since his damage is not that good, you probably should prioritize HP to buff his healing capabilities, so running the 2 pieces Tenacity Millilith set in tandem with something else should be a fine choice. Weapon-wise, honestly, his signature weapon looks quite bad, as it's pretty much a 5-star prototype Ember, with additional offensive effects that won't do much for him, so stick with free-to-play options here. As a whole, Baizhu doesn't seem a bad unit, as it's pretty much impossible for him to be bad, since Dendro teams are just so good that him being a Dendro healer gives him a solid potential in the meta by default. If you add the fact that he has Dendro infused attacks, that also gives him potential on Hyper Bloom teams by default, which is nice. What's disappointing is that he doesn't seem to bring anything especially useful to the teams he can fit on as an off-fielder, excluding the healing. While Dendro teams are relatively new, they aren't lacking in good options in any role, so new units will need to have something really strong to offer to truly improve them, and this doesn't seem the case for Baizhu at the moment. As always, all of this is subjected to change, so take it with a grain of salt. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!